On this Sunday night, fears of a wider war. Israelis told to flee as clashes escalate at the Lebanese border. The U.S. increases its military presence in the region. Intensifying airstrikes rip apart more families in Gaza. And Israel's error at the Egyptian border. How the conflict is causing issues in Canadian schools.
It's too hard to understand the abstract.
The best way to explain the crisis to kids. Trudeau in trouble? What internal polling reveals about the PM's popularity. Refugees feeling forgotten.
It's becoming longer than before. Now it's almost 2 years waiting for the hearing.
A new life on hold because of a bureaucratic backlog.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. There are new fears tonight. The bloody battle between Israel and Hamas could swell into a wider war. Israel is pounding Gaza, and in a statement today, the military admitted it also accidentally hit an Egyptian post near the border with Gaza. An Egyptian army spokesperson said several border guards were injured. The U.S. is increasing its military presence in the area and along Israel's tense northern border with Lebanon. Fears of another front opening with Iran-backed Hezbollah. Palestinians stuck in Gaza are scared and they're running out of food and water. Today, for the second day in a row, some aid trucks entered, but it's not nearly enough. The UN also reported today 29 staff members have been killed in Gaza since the conflict began. Our Jeff Semple starts us off in Jerusalem tonight with the escalating tensions. Jeff.
Farah, if Hamas thought that releasing 2 Israeli-American hostages on Friday would see a reduction in Israeli airstrikes, it was wrong. The night sky over Gaza doesn't stay dark for long. Israeli warplanes struck targets across Gaza overnight, as well as a mosque in the West Bank and 2 airports in Syria. We intensified our attacks and dozens of terrorists were killed, said this Israeli military spokesperson. He repeated Israel's warning for residents in Gaza to move to the south for their own safety. People in this home had followed that evacuation order, but their building south of Gaza City was flattened anyway. An Israeli airstrike reportedly killing at least 6 people and injuring dozens more. Staff at this Gaza hospital are caring for the most vulnerable patients, for whom time is running out. More premature births are occurring due to the war, the obstetrician says. She warns the hospital will run out of fuel within hours. Both the incubators and the heating require electricity. If these babies don't stay warm, they will die from the cold, or they'll die because we run out of medications for newborns, she says. The UN estimates the fuel supply in all of Gaza will be finished in less than 3 days.
I mean, we are beyond a humanitarian catastrophe, and we can't even imagine the day after in Gaza.
A second convoy of humanitarian aid was allowed to enter Gaza from Egypt, though officials said it did not include fuel. Around 14 trucks this time, that's fewer than Saturday, and just a fraction of what the UN says is desperately needed.
This is the reality. Yes, it's a drop in the ocean. And I'm puzzled by the fact that the international community doesn't come to terms with the fact that there is a need for an immediate ceasefire.
The Israeli government says there will be no ceasefire until all hostages in Gaza are freed. Israel now says 212 people are being held there.
So we just want them back home.
This Israeli school teacher survived the Hamas attack on her community. She says some of her students are now among the hostages.
We just want the hostages back. We just want the hostages back. They didn't do anything. They are kids.
She and other Israeli evacuees say the pro-Palestinian protests in Canada and other countries are hard to stomach.
We're only defending ourselves. We don't want to kill anyone. We want to be safe in our homes. They are terrorists. In September 11, no one stood by the terrorists. Why now people stood by them? Why people are justifying somehow the Hamas? I don't understand. They are a terrorist organization.
Well, Western societies appear divided. Western leaders are, for the most part, standing firmly behind Israel. The French president and the Dutch prime minister are scheduled to visit Israel this week on the heels of their British and American counterparts. The Canadian prime minister's office says Justin Trudeau has no plans to visit. Farah?
Jeff Semple in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you, Jeff. Canada's defense minister says the Canadian Armed Forces has done an independent review and analysis of Tuesday's explosion at the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. In a statement released late yesterday, Bill Blair said the analysis indicates with a high degree of confidence that Israel did not strike the hospital and that the more likely scenario is that the strike was caused by an errant rocket fired from Gaza. Hundreds of people were killed. Along Israel's northern border with Lebanon, 14 more villages have been added to an expanded evacuation zone. Israeli Defense Forces say they've hit Hezbollah infrastructure in response to the militant group attempting to launch anti-tank missiles towards Israel. Roughly 4,000 people have been forced from their homes on the Lebanese side. Crystal Goomansingh joins us now from Beirut. And Crystal, what do we know about the Canadians in Lebanon?
Farah, there's roughly 14,000 Canadians registered as being here in Lebanon. The Canadian Armed Forces says it's preparing for the possibility that it might need to help get those Canadians out of the country. Today, Israel's prime minister spent the day on the northern border with troops, and he was talking to them about Hezbollah, saying he can't guarantee them if Hezbollah will enter the war, but he tried to boost their morale, saying, and I quote, "We will cripple it with a force it cannot even imagine." The Israeli government press office released these images of another troop tour by the Israeli prime minister. This time, he wasn't talking about Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia. If Hezbollah decides to enter the war, he says, it will miss the second Lebanon war. It will make the mistake of its life. Since October 7th, the two sides have been attacking one another sporadically, but to deadly effect. Both sides are moving citizens further away from the hostilities, and while neither is taking things to the next level, they're also not letting the situation diffuse either. Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General said on Saturday, "We tell all of those who contact us to stop the aggression so that its repercussions and the possibilities for its expansion will stop. However, as long as the aggressor continues, no one can guarantee anything." A barrel of gunpowder is how Iran's foreign minister described the situation in the region. Both Hezbollah and Hamas are a part of what Iran calls its axis of resistance. As for citizens on both sides of the borders, they are preparing to leave and trying to find somewhere safe to go and wondering if they will have a home to go back to. Farah?
Crystal Goomansingh in Beirut. Thank you, Crystal. Police in several Canadian cities say there has been a noticeable spike in hate crimes in recent weeks against both Jewish and Muslim communities. Heather Yarks-West has that story.
Those that knew her say Samantha Wall made the world a better place. The well-known member of Detroit's Jewish community was found stabbed to death outside her home Saturday night.
So Sam was a board member of the Jewish Community Relations Council, American Jewish Committee here in Detroit. She was also president of the downtown synagogue.
The death comes just a week after the killing of a 6-year-old boy in Illinois. Police say the Palestinian-American child was the victim of a vicious anti-Muslim attack. It's a spillover of violence from the Middle East that Canadian communities are seeing as well. In Toronto, there have been 14 hate crimes reported in the last couple of weeks.
12 have been related to anti-Semitism. 2 have been related to anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic events.
The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs say reports of anti-Semitic incidents are up across the country, leaving community members feeling vulnerable and exposed.
We have to be vigilant that we don't import conflict from abroad. It is difficult for all of the stakeholders, communities, to try and make sense of things, to try and find a way forward.
Canada's Muslim community has also seen an increase in horrific hate crimes in recent years. The man accused of using his vehicle to run down and murder 4 members of a Muslim family in London, Ontario 2 years ago is currently standing trial.
We need to address head-on the problem of anti-Palestinian racism that is quite widespread in Canadian institutions, both media, politics, education, and elsewhere.
Canadians grieving for those lost abroad now worry increasingly for their safety at home, too. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
Internal government polling obtained by Global News shows that in most provinces, Canadians see the federal government as being on the wrong track. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, has been going over the polling for us. And David, it seems the results show the government is struggling to win approval from Canadians.
Well, for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his closest advisors rely heavily on data, on numbers that can tell a story. Trudeau's PMO, in fact, is the first in history to ask the Privy Council Office, the PCO, to run a comprehensive weekly polling program to track its own performance and keep on top of the issues Canadians think are important.
Global News used access to information laws to get those internal polls. The most recent are from January to June, but they tell a clear story. Canadians were giving the government a failing grade. The polls show that more Canadians said the government was on the wrong track every week for 6 months, and that gap between wrong and right was widening. The PMO got the message, and in July, the Prime Minister shuffled his cabinet, putting one of his rising stars, Nova Scotia's Sean Fraser, as the point person on housing. That was an issue those internal polls had also flagged as one that needed urgent attention. But the Prime Minister kept his Environment Minister in place, Montreal MP Stephen Guilbeault, and the PM's advisors could point to their internal polls again for that decision. First, Quebec voters consistently rated climate change and the environment as the most important issue of the day, even as Canadians in Ontario, the West, and Atlantic Canada were saying that the cost of housing and inflation was the #1 issue. Second, Quebec was the only region where more voters consistently said the Trudeau government was on the right track rather than the wrong track.
If the Trudeau government loses support in Quebec, well, that is the ballgame in the next election. And that's one of the big takeaways from this series of internal polling. The Trudeau government has little choice but to gear its priorities to the priorities of Quebecers, even if those priorities might be at odds with the rest of the country. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you for your coverage, David. Tens of thousands of refugees stuck in limbo. Coming up, how Canada's immigration backlog is forcing asylum seekers to wait years for a decision. And also coming up, the St. Lawrence Seaway shut down, why hundreds walked off the job. Canada's Auditor General says the federal government needs to improve how it manages immigration programs. Her new report finds that refugees are stuck in immigration processing delays stretching back almost 3 years. As Shagufa Danish tells us, it's created a permanent residency backlog that's left one Afghan woman in Ottawa feeling forgotten.
Amina Khavari is not an artist, but painting is a way for her to cope.
It helps me to de-stress.
Khavari earned her master's degree in the U.S. and was planning to return home when the Afghan government collapsed 2 years ago. With her student visa expiring, she crossed into Canada as a refugee, beginning another challenging journey.
I was carrying this fear all the time with me that what happens if I'm not accepted.
The Catholic Center for Immigrants helps refugees like Khavari resettle in Canada and navigate the many obstacles to starting over.
Now it's becoming longer than before. Now it's almost 2 years waiting for the hearing. I don't understand why, honestly.
In a scathing report, Federal Auditor General Karen Hogan found there were 99,000 refugee applications still waiting to be processed in a department with higher workload and fewer staff.
We found that most delays and backlogs were caused by the department's own processes.
Immigration Minister Mark Miller says the government is taking action.
We are opening a permanent residence online portal to refugees, which will help accelerate that, but obviously the proof will be in the pudding.
Khawari's refugee claim was approved, but she is now stuck in another backlog, waiting to become a permanent resident. Without it, she cannot visit her sick mother in Afghanistan.
With my status, I'm not able to do anything for them. I feel myself like as a hopeless person, to be honest.
She has found some hope. Khawari has an apartment and a full-time job with the Catholic Center for Immigrants.
I really wanted to give back and then help those refugees in need.
By helping others, she is helping herself get through this difficult time as she wades through a bureaucratic backlog, hopeful for a new life in Canada. Shugufa Danish, Global News, Ottawa.
Argentina votes ahead a close presidential race in a time of economic crisis. Hundreds of workers have walked off the job at the St. Lawrence Seaway. Negotiations between Unifor and the employer went up to the midnight deadline, with the two sides remaining apart on wages.
I understand that a strike is disruptive, but that's the way to do it. That's the mostly only power that the worker got.
We know that about $17 billion in trade moves through the St. Lawrence Seaway each year. So a disruption to a critical artery like this is bound to have significant impacts on industrial supply chains, both upstream and downstream. So we can imagine a strike like this having knock-on impacts throughout the economies of both Canada and the US.
The shipping artery includes 15 locks, and it runs between Montreal and Lake Erie. In Argentina, the polls have just closed for the South American country's presidential election, and the most important issue for voters was its dire economy. Inflation is well above 100%, but the campaign was also dominated by a controversial libertarian candidate. He's called climate change a socialist lie. He promised to abolish Argentina's currency, and he believes selling human organs should be legal. Redmond Shannon reports.
He may look like an aging 70s rock star, but Javier Milei's politics are very much of the modern era. The frontrunner in Argentina's presidential election is chopping down political norms and conventions, very much in the style of Donald Trump and Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro. His slogan is "Long live freedom, damn it." The brash TV pundit and libertarian economist wants to abolish Argentina's currency and its central bank.
Bueno salió el sector público. ¡Afuera!
He also wants to ditch some government departments. The climate skeptic has proposed restricting abortion rights too. Milei is striking a chord with voters who feel they have nothing to lose. What was once one of the world's leading economies is now mired in its latest economic crisis. Inflation is rampant at 140%, and 2 in 5 live below the poverty line. Milei has suggested making it legal for people to sell their organs. This Milei supporter says Argentina needs change. But this woman says Milei's policies are simply cruel. Milei's two main opponents are from the traditional centre-right and centre-left in Argentina. The current economy minister Sergio Massa and conservative Patricia Bullrich. A winning candidate likely needs 45% to claim victory after this first round. Otherwise, there will be a runoff next month. In another similarity with Donald Trump, Milei says if he doesn't win, he could allege voter fraud, something he claims cost him 5% in August's primaries, although he never provided evidence. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Talking to children about war. Next, strategies to help build empathy. The violent images and news coming out of the Middle East are having an impact on many people and places. And that includes schoolyards and classrooms. As Mike Drolet reports, experts say it's important to break it down in a way children can relate to.
You kidnapped Holocaust survivors. Lines are clearly drawn with competing points of view.
Do not believe the Israeli mouthpiece and
people!
What's abundantly clear is the anger that exists, the hate.
Down with Zionism! Down with Zionism!
It's impossible for any of us, kids included, to ignore. Last week, a predominantly Jewish school in Toronto reported instances of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, with one parent saying her kid was told, "I can't sit beside you because you're Muslim, and Muslims kill Jews." Kids no longer friends because of a complicated geopolitical conflict that began long before they were born.
Hard to understand why is this war, and we don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. We don't understand terrorism. It's just too hard to explain those words and that concept. But we can understand and explain the way we feel.
So how do we talk to our kids? For one, it's important not to incite more violence with actions or words. Rather, teach them compassion through the eyes of the innocents caught in the crossfire, like this 13-year-old boy trying to survive in Gaza.
It's not the kids' fault that this war happened. It's no one's fault. It's not fair that this is happening. It shouldn't be happening.
It's helpful to prioritize humanity by telling these individual stories to help children appreciate that they have similar wishes and hopes, just like other people across the world.
They don't have to understand the politics or see the evidence of the atrocities being committed. They just have to learn that there are no winners in conflicts like these. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Ellesmere Island, Nunavut. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.